So now we're going to dive into these input controls a little bit further. So as I said before in the previous slide, we have two types of input controls that we'll be dealing with. One is called a data input control, and the other is called a text input control. So a data input control is used to input data choices from a user. So these are things like radio buttons, check boxes, submit buttons, reset buttons, or selection menus. So something to note here is that data input control does not allow you to type in anything. You are essentially clicking buttons and boxes and menus. So all of the choices are already programmed in there, and you select your choices. That's data input. You're inputting data and you're selecting choices. So that's the big thing here. So a data input control is something that does not allow you to type. The choices are already there. And we'll go through these in a little bit and really dissect the options for each one. Text input controls are just how they sound. They allow you to input text. So common types of these are text boxes, so little text boxes that ask you to input your first and last name. A password text box. So for example, when I'm logging into my computer and that password text box pops up, or I'm logging into Google and that password text box pops up, I type something in. That again is a text input control. And then the last one here is a text area box, which is similar to a text box, but just a bigger area for you to type. So these are the main controls that we'll be talking about. These first three, text, password, and text area, are all they're all ones where you input text, and then these last five are the input ones where the data input ones, where you actually select. So I'm going to go through these, so don't try and scribble down all these notes right now, because we're going to go through them one at a time. So this is what a text box or a password text box will look like. I do these two text input controls together because they basically have the same attributes and a very similar purpose. You're typing in a little bit of text. The difference with the password text box is that you're typing things in, but you don't actually see the letters appear. You see just stars or dots or something of that nature. So pretty similar. They both allow you to type in a small amount of text. Just the password text box, they show up not as letters because you want it to be hidden since it's a password. So a couple of things about text boxes is that the value inside of the attribute tag will be type text. And we'll go through these when we actually start typing them in. But when you have your input tag and you do type, if you want a text box, you use a type of a text. And its function is simply to create a short field of input from text. So if you want to be able to enter maybe one line of text, that's what a text box would be used for. And as kind of a note down here, it's very, very useful for a relatively small amount of text. So maybe up to like 20 letters at most. If they have to enter in something longer, then generally a text area box is a better choice. Now, some attributes that we can use with the text box is we can use the size. So the size determines the number of characters that are displayed on the form. And size is different than max length. So you can choose both a size attribute as well as a max length attribute for your text box. The size determines the number of characters that are displayed, and then the max length specifies the maximum length of the input field. So for example, you could choose a size of 10, which would display 10 letters at a time in that little box. But then you could also select a max length of 25, which means only 10 letters would be displayed due to the size attribute, but that you could type up to 25 characters before you'd run out of space. And then as a little remark down here, if your max length exceeds your size, the text will scroll to the left as the user types. So you've probably seen this before. You have a pretty small box and you start typing and it starts automatically scrolling to the left. That is because you have a text box with a max length that exceeds the size. Then from here, the password text box is actually very similar and has very similar attributes. It's also contained in the input tag, and except this time, if you want to use a password text box, you're going to do a type of a password. So you're going to do type equals password instead of type equals text. And what this will do is it'll essentially give you some sort of encrypted line of text that will appear as bullets, asterisks, or another character of your choice. And you'll notice here that the attributes are the same as a text box, so they have a size and a max length. And just a little remark about a password text box is it's really used to protect the visitor's password from being observed. So the reason that we use a password text box over a normal text box is because it will change the letters to be something that's deceiving. You can't tell what letter was typed if just an asterisk pops up. So these are really only used when a password or something that needs to be hidden is being typed. Then the third type of text input control is your text area box. You'll notice here this is something that is a little bit longer. It may have a scroll bar off to the side, but this is something that requires you to type more than one line of text. So here it says what golf accessories will you need next year? Well, you're probably going to have to type a somewhat longer response, and as a result, you'll use a text area box instead. Now, this is one that is different. So you noticed with the text box and the password box that you used the input tag and then did type equals text or type equals password. Here, the text input control is a little bit different. We don't actually use the input tag. So note here, there is no input tag, and I might actually make that a whole different color to stand out to you. There's no input tag. Instead, you use what's called a text area tag. So no input tag, you just use the text area tag. And this is, as I said before, useful for extensive amounts of input, and it's used to create a field that allows multiple lines of text. So you'll have as many lines of text as you'd like. You can make that box as large as or as small as you would like. Now, a couple of key attributes. First are the rows. So you'll want to specify the number of rows in the text area field. So that's the number of rows going down. Then you'll also have columns, which columns are specifying the number of characters across. So you could say I want 4 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, that each go 100 characters across, and that would be what you would put in your columns. So that's really how you determine the size of your text input box. Then from here, a couple of other things you can do is you can actually disable the text box. So something that you might, there's some time where you might want to do this is if you're making a form, but this box isn't ready to have text inputted into it yet, then you would write disabled in there, and I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. So you can disable it and gray it out for another time, maybe in the future when you're ready to have users fill out that text box. You can also have a read-only text box where the user can only read the text and the text can't be changed. And then you can also give it a tab index, which basically means you can set the tabbing order. You've all been in a form before where you've pressed tab to get to the next box, and you can actually decide the order by using the tab index attribute. And you'll kind of see that later on as we incorporate that into a later program, is you can actually set the order of where you want things to go. It doesn't have to go directly in order. So there are your 3 text input controls. And now we're going to move forward into your data input control. So the first one is called a radio button. And here it says, do you like golf, yes or no? So hopefully this is giving you a feel for radio buttons are ones where you have to choose either or. Basically, you have a set of options and you only get to choose one particular option. So in this case, you could click yes or no, but you could not click both. They're linked together. You can only pick one option. So similar to the previous text box and password text box that we've talked about, this uses the input tag and uses the type radio. So we'd say type equals radio, and a radio button is also called an option button. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, it's used to make a single choice from a list of choices. You cannot choose multiples within a radio button list. You can only choose one particular choice. A couple of remarks. It says when visitors select one of the radio buttons, all others are deselected. So as your choice changes, the others will all deselect. You can only pick one of those options. By default, they are all deselected, but I will show you how to actually program it so that a particular button starts off being checked at the startup. So there's your first data input control. And if you move on to the next video, that video will talk through the second of those data input controls.